Hamish de Bretton Gordon is a retired UK Army colonel. He was a commanding officer of the NATO's and Ukraine chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear reaction troops. Welcome to our program, Colonel Hamish.
Thank you very much for having me.
President Zelensky says that Ukraine is at war with North Korea. 10,000 North Korean troops were being trained in Russia and would be deployed to Ukraine to fight Ukrainian forces alongside with Russian forces on the ground in Ukraine, according to Ukrainian media outlets. What is your reaction to this?
Well, sadly, I'm not too surprised. I mean, I think it is a major escalation, and the NATO commanders and the leaders in the United Kingdom and the US need to look at this very closely. I think we've been well aware that North Korea has been providing a lot of ammunition and some ballistic missiles to Russia. So to escalate to providing soldiers is another level. And I think the great concern is that what are the Russians giving in return? We know that the North Koreans are desperate to get a nuclear capability, a weapon that they can threaten other people. And North Korea is a rogue state. It is a tyrannical state led by a tyrant that could threaten Japan and a whole host of other countries if it had a nuclear weapon. And that seems to be the reason that the North Koreans are supplying troops. I think perhaps on the other side, it shows how desperate the Russians are getting. We know that they have had over 600,000 soldiers killed in Ukraine and are really running short of conscripts. President Putin is concerned that he's going to have to insist that some of the oligarchs and the rich people who sit around him and run Russia are going to have to start sending their children to the front line. And that will really affect the way that Putin does business. But he's quite happy, Putin that is, to go to tyrannical states like North Korea and get soldiers off them to throw them into the Russian meat grinder. But what are the North Koreans getting in return? And if it is nuclear know-how and technology, then that is something that the world really needs to sit up and look at. And it'll be very interesting to see the reaction from NATO countries and the United States.
How could this deployment of North Korean soldiers to Ukraine influence the situation on the ground and the outcome of the war?
Well, 10,000 soldiers is a lot of soldiers. That is perhaps a division's worth of soldiers. How competent the North Koreans are, I wouldn't expect that they are particularly well trained. I mean, certainly they're not motivated. If it's like Russia, I expect these will be press men. These will be forced to do it. And maybe they're criminals out of North Korean jails. So how effective soldiers are is all about leadership. So I think it's more a strategic issue. It's a sort of marker for the world to comment. But 10,000 soldiers in a certain area, be it in areas of the Donbass or elsewhere, no doubt the Russians will use these North Koreans as cannon fodder. But Putin won't care, and I don't suppose Kim Jong Un, the leader of North Korea, will care. But it's something that we need to watch very, very closely. And presumably the Russians will also go to Iran and see if they can provide soldiers to fight there. So it's an escalation, certainly. It means that the sort of axis of evil of Russia, Iran, and North Korea are really moving together. But I think it also shows that Putin is getting very desperate. And hopefully, now that President Zelensky is presenting his plans for victory to NATO and to also the EU, it should encourage Western leaders to sort of go the extra mile, as it were, give everything President Zelensky wants. This might be an opportunity for President Zelensky to get on the front foot. And it's although it is a desperate escalation, there may also be some positive elements to it as well.
Also, some North Korean officers have already been killed in Ukraine by the Ukrainian missile strike. Also, we have read some reports about the desertion of the North Korean troops from the part of Russia which could be endangered by Ukraine, with, the border region between Ukraine and Russia. But how should the West respond to this escalation from North Korea and Russia?
Well, absolutely. First of all, the West should respond through the United Nations. This is basically North Korea joining an illegal war. This is an illegal invasion by Russia into Ukraine. The International Criminal Court has already issued warrants the arrest of President Putin, recognizing that this is illegal. This is a crime against the Geneva Convention. And North Korea and the North Korean leadership are joining that crime. And the first thing that must be done is stated in the International Criminal Court and also United Nations. But what the West must do is galvanize itself. If people don't realize that there is no limit to what Putin will do, this should be an absolutely unequivocal message of that. And the West cannot further prevaricate with its provision of military hardware to Ukraine to ensure that it can prevail. But I think it's also, it is showing that Putin is running out of men. We know he's running out of missiles and ammunition, which is why he's gone to North Korea and Iran. And this is the opportunity that Ukraine needs, and Ukraine needs the West to absolutely get behind it. That the dealing with these crimes in the International Criminal Court and elsewhere, that'll come later. The most important thing at the moment is to make sure that President Zelensky and the Ukraine army, the Ukraine military, has all it needs to prevail against the Russians.
Also, North Korea has blown up its road with South Korea, and there have been some reports about the mobilization of 1.5 million people in the North Korea. There have been some reports that they would join the North Korean army. Do you see this as indications of Kim Jong Un willingness to attack the South Korea?
Well, there are a lot of interesting things happening, and certainly shutting the border might be an indication that North Korea intends to do something. But I think sending 10,000 troops to Russia will, actually, these are regular soldiers. These are not just mobilized recruits, as it were. Maybe it is a sign that Kim Jong Un, the leader of North Korea, is concerned. But the sort of saber rattling and the sort of quiet conflict between North and South Korea goes on all of the time. And I think, again, the big concern is that, if North Korea does have the ability to produce a nuclear missile, then that shifts the balance very much against South Korea. Now, South Korea is underwritten by the US. And I think there are about 60,000 US soldiers in South Korea. So, there is, North Korea needs to be very careful. If they attack South Korea and kill US soldiers, then that will bring the US into that particular battle, which is probably not what the North Koreans intend. But it's all interlinked, as we've discussed, with what's happening in Ukraine. So this is a very, very dangerous time indeed. And it is key. And the timing, it might not be incidental. We know that the US elections are happening in a few short weeks. And that, again, could impact on what's happening in Ukraine, and also the decision making over what's potentially happening between North and South Korea. So these are very, very dangerous times. But I suppose the only other element to it is you would not expect North Korea to send so many soldiers, so much ammunition, so many missiles to Russia if it is intending to have a conflict with South Korea. That, with my sort of military hat on, as it were, that would not be a good move.
Also, as North Korean soldiers would be deployed to the battlefield in Ukraine, it could be do you see this as an act of war against Ukraine? North Korea could become the third party of this war. Does this escalation give the West gives the West right to retaliate with deploying even its own troops to Ukraine?
Well, that is a very good point. I think to your first point there, yes, absolutely. North Korea has joined the war with Russia against Ukraine. That is unequivocal. You know, if there are 10,000 North Korean troops fighting Ukrainian troops, they are party to this war, and they should seek the same punishment. Now, whether that will encourage NATO to put troops on the ground, I think that is unlikely at the moment. But what it must encourage NATO to do, and the second key element to President Zelensky's plan for victory, is the ability to use NATO weapons in Russia. And if the deployment of North Korean troops does not make Western leaders give President Zelensky that authority, I really don't know what will. So this could well be a major strategic error by Putin to get North Korean troops on the ground, because it absolutely gives the unequivocal options to Western leaders. And as we know today, President Zelensky is in Europe presenting his plans to the European Union summit. And one of the key elements of the plans is to use Western weaponry in Russia. And I think, absolutely, this should give carte blanche to President Zelensky to do that. It is an act of war against Ukraine by North Korea to escalate the situation so dangerously.
Also, the New York Times reported that September was the bloodiest month for the Russian army, with 115,000 Russian soldiers killed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion and 500,000 wounded. Could this be a reason why Putin is so desperate? Why he asked North Korean leader to deploy its own troops to Ukraine?
Yes, no, I think it absolutely is. Those sort of figures, even for a country the size of Russia, are extraordinary. And we know he's running out. Predominantly, the Russian army is manned by ethnic recruits from Eastern Russia, not the rich Russians in the west of Russia around Moscow and St. Petersburg, who really run the country and have influence. But now that Putin's running out of those recruits, that's why he's had to go to North Korea to deploy North Korean soldiers to the front line, who appear to be pretty unkeen to be there. So I think an army in a country the size of Russia cannot sustain the casualties that it's had. We know that from the Second World War. We even know that from the First World War. So it is, again, this should be an opportunity, if NATO countries, if the West is bold, to make sure that President Zelensky and the Ukraine armed forces can prevail. It just shows, I think the last time we discussed, the morale in the Russian army is rock bottom because of all those casualties. They're very poorly led, very poorly paid, and most of the desertion rate is huge. Most would not want to be on the front line at all. And if you've got to get foreign countries like North Korea to come and prop you up, to me that says that Putin's in trouble, and now is the time to really put the boot in, as it were.
Also, Bloomberg reported that the US government was confident that Ukraine would be able to hold captured ground in the Kursk region for many months. Do you agree with such assessment?
Yes, I do. I think the Kursk operation that we have discussed in the past was a brilliant move by the Ukraine army and the way they set it up. For sure, eventually, many weeks after the invasion, Russia has managed to counterattack and take back some land, but nothing of significance. And I think also, as as President Zelensky has mentioned, this is a key element. And I believe the Ukrainian ambassador in London today has been giving a briefing that, again, it's the Kursk invasion, the Kursk capture of land will be a key element to any discussions in the future when hopefully we can have a ceasefire that Ukraine agrees with. So, yeah, I think the Kursk maneuver was very, very significant and has really rattled Putin and his generals, and is no doubt why he's now having to get North Koreans to come and prop up, his ailing military.
President Zelensky has presented a plan to end the war in Ukraine next year. This plan consists of many important points, but we will cover with you the most important one. So the plan consists of the invitation for Ukraine to join NATO, to allowing Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia with Western-made weapons, and deploying non-nuclear deterrent to Ukraine. What is your take on the President Zelensky victory plan?
Well, I think he's absolutely spot on. To me, the most important thing and the easiest one to solve is the second one, the use of Western weapons into Russia. That should have happened months ago. We would not be in this position now if that had happened. And let's hope that the leaders, the Western leaders he's asking, authorize that absolutely as soon as possible. The NATO question, yes, of course. If Ukraine had been part of NATO before the 24th of February 2022, Russia wouldn't have invaded. And I think the other key element, if Ukraine is part of NATO, it provides, if you like, the keystone, as we'd call it in the UK, to NATO's defence, because then from north to south across Europe, you would have NATO countries, and very much with Ukraine in the middle there. So I think for the longer term peace, it's essential that Ukraine becomes part of NATO. When we're talking about a non-nuclear deterrence, I think that is possibly, going to be more difficult for some of the Western leaders. I think they would say that they have non-nuclear deterrence in places like Poland that are obviously very close to Ukraine, but deploying Western military hardware or more military hardware in Ukraine, manned by NATO troops, as it were, is that is certainly a possibility. And I think what NATO countries need to make clear to Putin is they are prepared to do that if Putin doesn't start looking at a way that they could withdraw Russian troops from illegally held territory within Ukraine.
Also, it would be important for our audience to understand the meaning of the non-nuclear deterrent. What does it mean from your perspective? What does President Zelensky want by outlining, by explaining this point about the non-nuclear deterrent on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, again, I expect that is open to interpretation. I'm perhaps thinking about long-range ballistic missiles that could potentially strike into Moscow, into key areas like that. Also, some strategic aircraft, likewise, stealth fighter bombers, and perhaps some maybe naval capability based in the Black Sea. So maybe President Zelensky has something in mind, but to me, no doubt it would be capability that could strike right into the heart of Russia and take out key areas like the Kremlin, Putin's palaces, and the like, with technology that overmatches anything that the Russians have at the moment. So to me, that is probably what it is, and I expect the Americans and perhaps the Brits and others would say, well, we can do that from outside Ukraine, but the key element would be for NATO leaders to articulate that so it's completely clear to Putin that they are prepared to use them if necessary.
Do you believe that this plan could really end the war in Ukraine next year? We have seen some reports that Western leaders have perceived this plan with skepticism. What is your take on that?
Well, I think, in order to end a war, you need to have a plan to end it. And, no doubt President Zelensky and his team have been working hard on this. To me, it has all the elements. The threat of Ukraine joining NATO, should be a real sort of that should be really important for Putin, and his generals. The trouble is, Putin is an autocrat. He pretty much runs it all on his own, and anybody who disagrees with him is got rid of. But that should be something that Putin would understand. He's completely stuck. If that comes to fruition, the ability to strike into Russia, absolutely. If Putin can't attack Ukrainian cities, and if he can't use his key airfields, then he's going to find it very difficult to make any headway around, in the Donbass or anywhere else. And if Ukraine can maybe increase the Kursk bridgehead, as it were, then that again should concern Putin. We understand also there are a number of elements to President Zelensky's plan that are still secret, and but has been briefed to Western leaders, and I should imagine they are also pretty key to making this work. So I think it's very good that now President Zelensky has briefed everybody on the plan for victory. And if the West get behind it, Putin will be really concerned. And if Putin can come to the negotiation table with Ukraine on Ukraine's terms, then maybe there is a chance that a peace that would be acceptable to Ukraine people would happen, and a peace where Kursk is traded for the land that Putin has illegally taken, and then that Ukraine becomes part of NATO. To me, that would secure Ukraine's future, into the next couple of decades. So it's really how the West reacts, I think. As we discussed earlier in this interview, I believe that the Russian army is in trouble. They're running out of manpower. Their morale is terrible. We know they're getting short of missiles and other key bits of equipment. The Russian economy is in free fall and crashing, and that is going to have a huge impact on the Russian people. And now that the Russian people are beginning to understand that they've had over 600,000 casualties. It was back in the 1980s that the mothers of Russian soldiers forced the Kremlin to withdraw from Afghanistan when 17,000 soldiers were killed. Now, this is a much greater number, but somehow the Russian state have managed to keep a lot of this quiet, which is why it's so important that the Russian people understand this devastation that's been done in their name by their autocratic leader. So, yes, let's hope with this plan in place that's fully supported by Western countries, particularly NATO, that actually the war can be ended, as President Zelensky has suggested next year.
But don't you think that Vladimir Putin does not want to negotiate in good faith with Ukraine, because in such case his regime could be endangered, and he could also face a physical threat to his life?
Absolutely, but that is the Russian way, isn't it? That is how the tyrannical leaders have met their end, and Putin must be seeing that. Putin knows that if he fails in his special military operation, he is finished, and in Russian terms, finished might not be just losing his job, but losing his life as well. And I know that there are many academics who comment on this, who say that whoever replaces Putin might be worse. Well, that might be the case, but Putin has destroyed the Russian army and the Russian economy. So, yeah, you are right that Putin knows that if he fails, then that is the end of him. But for you and Ukraine and us in the West, I don't think we should worry about that. That's Russia's problem. They can sort that out when Putin's gone. But what is key is to end this war as quickly as possible on terms that are acceptable to the Ukraine people.
But don't you think that Vladimir Putin will not negotiate with Ukraine, will not end the war as long as he stays in power and as long as he's alive?
Well, you are probably right. Yes, I think that is probably the case. But the way to end the war and the way to end Putin's rule is to make sure that Ukraine prevails. So, yeah, if the West can give Ukraine the right to fight, attack into Russia, it's going to tip the balance, I think, and his military will collapse. And if that happens, then we only have to look at the history of Russian leaders, that his time in power will be pretty limited. So it is a difficult situation. Everybody in the West is concerned by the words regime change, but actually, in this case, I think most people who really understand this and look at this very deeply believe that actually a Russia without Putin will be a much safer place for the West than a Russia with Putin. And Putin is reaching the end of his reign, and we must make sure that that happens sooner rather than later.
And do you see any kind of fragileness of his regime? And do you see any kind of other powers in Kremlin who could be interested in removing Vladimir Putin right now or sometime?
Well, no, I don't think there's anybody interested in removing him right now. But once he's gone, there will be a number of people who will step in to take over. I think Putin still has a very firm grip on power. And that grip is a bit like Stalin, is done through terror. But as we saw when Stalin died, very quickly his position was filled by other tyrants around him. And I think the same will happen with Putin after he's removed from office, be it by them or be it by some other means.
And I would like also to cover some other aspects of the Ukrainian victory plan. Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Army, General Syrskyi, said that the UK was preparing its own proposals in context of the Ukraine's victory plan. How could they look like? Well,
I hope, first of all, they'll look like giving the Ukraine military free rein to use the British or the key British military pieces of kit, like the Storm Shadow missile, which could be so important in attacking into Russia. I hope also it's about giving extra equipment. We've seen an announcement over the last couple of days that the Australian government are giving 50 tanks, Leopard 1 tanks. Similarly, Britain has, a couple of hundred Challenger 2 tanks that are sitting in sheds not being used. So looking at what other hardware can be given to Ukraine. Again, it's to a show to Russia as much as Ukraine that countries like Britain are prepared to, support. We've heard a lot about the British Prime Minister saying he'll support Ukraine and Zelensky, till the very end. But words are one thing, deeds are the other, and deeds include giving more equipment and also giving more authority. It might well be that the UK is also planning to help with more training and more advice, strategic advice and intelligence. So, and also perhaps helping Ukraine to become a member of NATO. But a whole raft of elements to it. But I personally hope Britain will lead the way, and hopefully if that is the case, then some of our European allies will do as well. But I think we're all very conscious that the US has its elections in November, and if President Trump is elected again, then that might affect the way that the US supports Ukraine, and it will mean that NATO countries in Europe really must step up even more. And I hope countries like Germany that have the capability to do so, and other European NATO countries step up their activity as well. We also, of course, now have Finland and Sweden in the NATO alliance, and they have very, very capable militaries, and they may well be encouraged to do more as well.
Thank you, Colonel Hamish, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you. Glory to Ukraine.